Hello and welcome back to Dan Cave and welcome back to another video build. So in this video build I am going to build the Revell 72nd scale F-4J Phantom II. So yeah, as many of you know from the channel, I'm fond of my 72nd scale aircraft. And I am particularly fond of Phantoms as well. So I built a number of them years ago. I haven't built one in many years, so picked this one up a couple of years back. One of the local hobby stores, reasonably cheap. So I said, picked it out and said I'd build it for a group build, for the American group build that's on over at ISM. So that group build started in January, I think. Yeah, sometime around January. So played my way through and built this kit. So this video is going to cover that build. It's going to cover everything, start to finish. So it's not multi-part. This is a single part. So it's reasonably long. So I'm not going to hang around and bore you with too many details. However, you know, if you've not been here before, please drop a subscribe. Please give a like if you can, if you like the video. And feel free to leave a comment as well when you get to the end. So yeah, so thank you for coming in anyway. So hopefully you'll stay around. So if you are planning on staying around, put your feet up, sit back and relax, and let's see how this video build goes. So I'll come back at the end for a little bit of a sum up. However, let's head on over to the bench and see what's happened to this kit. So here we go. That's the box. Usual Revell end opening box. Very annoying. Very annoying. So obviously one of the flashier new boxes from Revell, but sadly inside it, upon inspection, it's obviously an aging kit. It's got raised panel lines, a little bit of flash. You can see some of the misalignment. However, things like that don't stop me. I'm just going to dive straight in and start removing certainly the main pieces, just to get a feel for how this kit will actually fit together. So as you can see, it's got two kind of main fuselage halves, a single piece under wing section, and then two top sections for the wing. So a little bit warped. Nothing that, you know, a little bit of extra thin glue won't solve. However, when you dry fit the underside, kind of see it's not a great fit. This is probably going to need a little bit of work. However, we'll come back to that kind of major assembly a little bit later. So first up, it's the cockpit. There is one kind of complete cockpit tub, some seat backs, instrument panels. So they've all been airbrushed in probably flat gold grey from Vallejo, I think. Don't forget to do the inside of the cockpit walls as well. And then it's a case of, at this scale, it's worth just a little bit of brush painting. So a little bit of matte black. You can get in around where some of the cockpit panels are. Now, weirdly, if I recall from the instructions, there's no call outs for the side console decals, but they are on the sheet, which I will realise later. So it wasn't really necessary to paint them. That they will get covered up by decals. A little bit of detail painted around the instrument panels, the seats, all brush painted. 72nd scale, that's absolutely fine. Certainly I tend to spray the base color and then just pick out the details in brush paint. So there is some mounted ejection handles. So they're painted in yellow initially. Just adding some kind of olive drab khaki color for the seats. Once that yellow paint is dry, I go back with a very fine brush and just paint in a little bit of black just to give that look of the ejection pull handles. There are numerous ways to do this. You can get decals for them, use very thin bits of tape. In this scale, I tend to find just a little bit of brush painting, and that's absolutely fine. So just use a slightly different color for the molded in seat harnesses. And that's just enough to pick out the details on those seats. I mean, for the age of this kit, or at least how old this kit feels, the cockpit detail's actually not bad. So here you can go. I finally get to the decal sheet and I realise that there is actually side consoles in there. So just cut out the cockpit decals, a little bit of water on the cutting mat, leave them soak for a bit, and those panels can then be popped on the instrument panels as required, and on the side consoles as well, of course, because they are included, which I didn't realise. So once they're on, just using a little bit of UMP strong, and if I can actually manage to get it in shot, there we go. They actually didn't come out too bad at all. So again, same process with the side consoles. So once those decals have been given suitable setting time, it's time to go back in with a little bit of ammo dark wash, just to help pick out some of the details and the panel lines in around the cockpit area. Panel lines, recessed areas in around the cockpit. So cockpit sidewalls are done, in around the seats and the footwell area, and in around the control panels. It just helps just give a little bit of a shadow tone in around the cockpit. Helps it look a little bit less two-dimensional. Once I'm kind of happy with that, use a little bit of Sansador on a cotton bud just to remove any excess and clean it all up. Because I've used acrylic paints, the Sansador obviously doesn't affect it too much, but you do have to be careful with a cotton bud because just the abrasion of a cotton bud can actually remove some of the paint. But as you can see, that turned out pretty much okay and can get popped into the fuselage halves as shown. And we can start the process of using some Tamiya Extra Thin just to run around that seam gap between the fuselage halves and get it all nicely buttoned up. Use of a close peg as well, just to keep it firmly together, because it is slightly warped, so it needs a little bit of pressure. And it will all kind of cure together absolutely fine. So just need to make sure I get all the way around, get into all those joining areas, and can pop another close peg on the rear section as well. Give that 20 minutes and that'll be reasonably well cured that you can take the back off. Obviously you need to leave it a little bit longer before you go back and sand or try and address any of the seams. So the bottom wing section, same process, a little bit of Tamiya Extra Thin. The fit on this is well, it's just horrific basically. It's not very good at all. Again, it is slightly warped, so a little bit of pressure is needed just to get it to hold to the two fuselage sections. Again, once in place, a little bit of Extra Thin will run, the capillary action will run into the join line and secure those parts. So before top wing is added, it's been sat to cure for probably a good 6 or 8 hours. It's time to go back and address some of that seam line work. Sometimes I like to do the seams in kind of stages, start addressing them before I kind of finish major construction. Sometimes it's easier to kind of manipulate the kit without everything fitted to it. So I've chosen to leave the wings off so I can get this fuselage seam cleaned up. So using a variety of UMP thinny sticks and UMP sanders, working my way through the grades as necessary, starting with the most coarse, working my way all the way up to the thinny buffer. There is a few areas where it's more useful to use a very small file, just because it will get in around and be a little bit more precise where I need to make some abrasions. But again, generally throughout I've used the UMP thinny sticks. They are incredibly effective at what they do. And then off camera, I've added the wings, the top wings. Not much drama there. They're just added with a little bit of extra thin. So it's time to start work on the intakes. Now, pretty much every Phantom kit I've ever built, this is where the fit is always bad. I've never found a Phantom kit where these fit spot on. So the first parts that go on are basically the inserts. So they've been airbrushed off camera in appropriate color. So they get glued to the fuselage sides. And then there'll be an external piece will sit over them. In theory, that should fit flush. The reality is I've never found a kit where it does. It's either a gap or there's a step. By all accounts, the Tamiya 48 scale one is probably spot on. But this one isn't Tamiya 48 scale kit. So kind of throughout this kind of build process, I'm also kind of making mental notes of where there's little issues with the kit, where things need correcting. It's very obvious it's an old mold. You know, certainly some parts are slightly misaligned. You can see where there's a kind of mold seam between them. However, at the moment, just focusing on getting the intakes done. So just using a little bit of masking tape just to protect surrounding areas so I can get relatively aggressive on the engine intake seam lines. So I'm going in with the UMP 180 thinny stick, the most aggressive of the grits available from the UMP thinny stick selection. Again, just kind of working that seam line down. It's kind of a step. I'll probably end up filling it. But in the first instance, I need to just kind of at least knock back the worst of the step that's there. See how far I can get it back before I go in with any filler to try and blend it out a little bit. So once I'm happy with at least the first cut with those UMP thinny sticks, go to a slightly higher grit, less abrasive. And then same process on the other intake side as well. So once I've brought it back as far as I kind of can, it's time to go in with a little bit of filler. That will hopefully just blend in the little bit of a step that remains and hopefully dramatically improve the appearance of these intakes. It's definitely something, you know, over the years with the Phantom kits I've built, it's kind of a common problem. There's a few seam lines elsewhere on the kit, so it's time to go in and address some of those. Once that Revell filler that I've used that time to cure, it's back in with the UMP sanders again. In this case, I'm using the 180 sander. Quite aggressive, but it knocks down the kind of the edge of, or at least the hump left by the filler material. Once that's been brought back relatively flush, I will go back in with higher grades and bring it back to a nicely sanded surface. So the amount of filling on this kit, you know, it's nothing I haven't faced before. But for some reason, in doing this kit, it just, I don't know, felt a lot harder work than I wanted from this kit. I was hoping it would go together a little bit better than it did. So I'm also using some Tamiya sanding sponge, just because it conforms a little bit better and make sure you don't end up with too much of a kind of flat edge, particularly around the kind of top shoulders, because they need to stay quite curved. Once I'm happy with that, as I said earlier, I'm in with some other UMP sanders, 240, 400, just to improve the look of those parts. Same process for the rest of the areas that I've filled on the rest of the airframe. And of course, once all this sanding work is complete, everything is cleaned up, all that dust removed, we can head on over to the spray booth and start the priming process. So all the major airframe parts are primed in UMP grey primer, all shot through the UMP apex at about 30 psi on my pressure gauge, so it'll be a little bit lower at the airbrush itself. So UMP primer goes on very, very well. Coverage is absolutely excellent from it. As you can see here, it is laying down very, very well. So I'm getting all the kind of underside areas, as much as I can get up, wrap around the side as well. And then that'll be set aside for probably a little under an hour, just for it to go touch dry. And then it can sit quite comfortably on this little rotating stand. And I can prime all the upper surfaces. Interestingly, you see how much overspray you get there, because the left wing has just received a blast of grey primer. But yeah, so happy enough with that grey primer finish. That can be set aside then for about 24 hours for it to fully harden and cure. Any dust spots can be sanded as necessary. So once that's all complete, I'm going to use some pre-shading on this, because it's quite a light grey and a white underside. So this is Vallejo Model Air Black, which has been heavily thinned with UMP thinner. So it's a very translucent black paint. So again, it's just picking out the areas that I want, basically to show a little bit of tonal difference in the white when it goes on top. And then I'm coming back with a Ushi van der Rosten splatter template. So that'll also give that kind of mottled effect of the black and grey, which will help bring out, again, more kind of random variation in the paint surface as it's completed. So there's a couple of different templates in the set. I use them randomly throughout the airframe. And I'm going to basically do the same on the top. A little bit of kind of pre-shading panel lining. As shown, must have gone for a refill or a little bit of a tip clean. It's important to keep the tip clean. So let's play some music and speed up this process. So as you can see, I've slowed it back down through that segment to show all the white on the underside being added. So that's given 24 hours to cure, and then we can mask up a couple of areas as appropriate. So I can start adding in the gold grey colour, which is the topside colour. So once again, it's a very similar process to what was done on the underside. With that kind of base coat of pre-shaded and mottling, I'm just kind of building up the grey in quite a patchy fashion to give that kind of rugged, weathered appearance and, you know, suitable kind of tonal variation. Not quite as pronounced as maybe on some examples that I've done, or, you know, you may have seen elsewhere, but it's kind of, it's giving the desired effect for how I want it to look. So as you can see, I'm just working away, building up the coats nice and slowly. So again, this is Vallejo Model Air's US Navy set that I'm using. And it is thinned a little bit with some UMP acrylic thinners. But overall, I'm kind of happy with the color density I've got, the level of kind of mottling and kind of shading that's come through. And that'll be kind of added to by the later weathering stages. But all in all, happy with that. So again, that's given another 24 hours to dry. A little bit of masking is done, and I can mask up the nose and tail sections to add in the black for the nose and the black tail of the Jolly Rogers, which is the squadron that will be depicted by this aircraft. So again, simple enough job. Mask up as much as you need to prevent any overspray. As you can see here, I'm using a little bit of cardboard just to stop any spray going past the tail fin and hitting the opposite wing. And you can see on the piece of card a little bit of black paint has appeared. So once that's dry, I've been able to mask up for the exhaust metallic areas. So that started with a base coat of Vallejo Model Air Silver. No, sorry, Tamiya X11 actually. And that's been added to with some paints from the ammo range from their jet exhaust set. So that's a combination of steels, stainless steel, and a little bit later some burnt iron as well, just to shade it. I have masked a few areas just to give that kind of distinctive striping that you'd see on an F4 exhaust area. And that will come off as soon as this is masked and dried. So now, once all that paintwork is nicely cured, sat for a couple of days, it's time to crack on with the decals. So first up, I'm going to get the main kind of decal across the back, these Jolly Roger stripes. And once again, I'm going to play some music, and the speed is ramped up a little bit. So I'll be back in a minute. And that is all the decaling complete. All using just some water and some UMP decal solutions. So carry on. So with the decals added, I think I've added a satin coat as well. So I've used Vallejo polyurethane satin varnish. So that's been left cure for a couple of hours. Can finally remove some of the masking from the canopy areas because it's going to have a final satin finish anyway. So all this masking can come off. So we can start to make sure that all those glasswork areas are completed correctly. So once that's all done, crack on with a little bit of weathering. So I'm going to use some UMP water-based washes, combination of colors, lighter, darker, mud, and clay, I think. A couple of little pots with decanted amounts. Start working on some of the kind of recessed grills and stuff that are located around the engine intakes. And then we'll progress on to a little bit more kind of random dirt wash across the airframe. So the first part of the weathering stage is just getting mainly any recessed areas, of which there's not very many. It's mainly a couple of kind of grills around the intakes. Get some dark dirt in there. And then it's a case of applying fairly random kind of splodges of dark dirt around the airframe. Kind of picking out a few areas I'd like to kind of highlight with a little bit of dirt. Being a water-based wash on a satin coat, it will stain a little bit, which is kind of the idea. But ultimately, we'll get that on in some random areas, move it around a bit. But then we'll also mix in some light dirt, some of the mud, just to give a little bit of tonal difference on what's being applied. So over the kind of entire fuselage area, we're kind of generally following the panel line areas, but they're obviously not recessed. They're raised on this kit. But obviously the final product, we're going to remove a lot of the product again. A lot of it's going on, but we will take quite a bit of it off. So it is kind of picking out all the kind of key areas I want to show. So once that's done, I'm using a wide flat brush, wetted with a little bit of water, just to kind of wet the surface a little bit, to basically blend it in a little bit into the surrounding areas, just to move the kind of pigments around a bit. It's not necessarily to remove it, it's more to just kind of blend it and kind of take away the kind of sharp edge that you get from just applying basically just some lines of wash. So this will blend it down quite nicely. As you can see, it's changed the tone on the fuselage quite a bit, giving it quite a kind of filtered effect in areas. But again, this is just the second step in this process. So once I've happily kind of blended that all the way across the airframe, just like so, I'm going to let that dry, but I'm going to accelerate a little bit by using a little bit of hot air just to dry that wash on. So it's non-permanent. It is a water-based wash, so it's non-permanent, but as it's a satin coat, it will stain a little bit. So it will be hard to remove it completely. But then that's exactly the desired effect I want. So once I'm happy that it's completely dry, and just getting a little bit of kitchen towel, lightly dampened with some water, and just beginning to rub away any of the wash that I want to remove. As you can see from what's on the towel, that is actually removing the wash. So we'll keep working that way. Obviously, in some areas, you may want to remove a little bit more, which will bring it back closer to the base color. Remove a little bit less in certain areas. Again, trying to be a little bit random with it, just to give that good effect of a nicely weathered and used airframe. Certainly these aircraft were quite exposed to the elements operating off aircraft carriers. So as you can see, that kitchen towel is just removing exactly what we need. You can then focus on some areas in a little bit more detail using cotton bud with some water as well. And that helps us remove even more of the material. But as I said before, as it's a satin coat, it will stain a little bit. It will stain a lot more if you use a matte coat. However, if you want to be able to remove it completely, a gloss coat is what you're probably looking for. But in this case, I kind of wanted the stained effect, so we've stuck with a satin coat. So yeah, all in all, fairly happy with that. We can crack on with the rest of the airframe. This time, speed it up with a little bit of music. So overall, quite happy with the weathering, how it's come out. As you can see, the complete airframe is now weathered. A few other bits and pieces are done off camera as well. So it's time to get the canopy section fitted. So start off fitting the front section of the canopy. So the glasswork, so the canopies are going to be open, mainly because they don't fit very well anyway. So it's easier to show them open. Can add on the tail planes as well, elevators. Fit on these is particularly bad. They don't quite line up properly. The angle is not particularly good. Just about get them adjusted to the point where I think they look okay, but they're not quite right. Just a really poor fit in this case from this Revell kit. Can finally add the flaps. So they're in a slightly drooped position. Quite a tight fit, but they do go in nicely. Get them at the right angle, they do just slot in, but they are quite awkward to fit. But ultimately, they do actually fit. To the exhausts, they were painted off camera, kind of a mixture of ammo MIG metallic colors. And then the undercarriage can be added. To the undercarriage, been pre-weathered, pre-assembled, all ready to go. A little bit of super glue, and it just slots, the nose gear slots perfectly in place. With the addition of the landing gear doors, the main landing gear is added also. And then the same for the other side. So then with the addition of the flaps and some of the landing gear doors, there is a little bit more kind of weathering just needed. A little bit of addition of some, I think it's light dirt in this case. Just using a liner brush. Pylons have also been added. They also need a little bit of a wash put on them. So in this case, that's a little bit of slapping on of the wash, but we'll go back with a flat brush just to clean up the little additions that we've made, using a little bit of water just to move that around, and some cotton buds just to clean up those areas. Similar process is done for the pylons as well. So just using a little bit of water just to move that pigment around, but it also helps pick up any excess as well. So with that done and complete, we can add the armament. So for this aircraft, I've gone for the 4 sidewinders and 4 sparrows. Now, one slight omission, I didn't weather the armament, the ordnance. Looking at photos, I think it can be a bit hit and miss. I mean, as they are now, they do stand out a little bit because they look brand new, freshly painted, which, you know, can in theory happen. But if they're not fired, they're not going to wash them, so they should weather, you know, as well as the rest of the airframe. So that is one slight omission, I think, on my part. I didn't actually weather the weaponry. So let's go with the fictitious assumption that on the previous mission they shot all 8 missiles, and the next mission they have 8 brand new missiles, which is why they're all nice bright white compared to the rest of the airframe. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, Your Honour. So with them on, we can add the canopies, a little bit of CA glue just to put them in place. There's no real positive location really for them, but they will hold themselves in place because they're quite light. CA glue will hold them in at an appropriate angle. So with that complete, that's the kit done. Yeah, trying not to pick it up by certain areas, but yeah, I think I'm overall quite happy, even with its flaws. So let's have a look at some photos, and I'll come back at the end for my final thoughts. So, here we go. There's the F-4J Phantom from Revell in all its glory. Yeah, maybe not the word I choose. So as you probably heard throughout the kind of video, it's not the best kit. It's an aging kit. I think it's definitely an X-monogram release, probably been released by a few other companies as well, looking at the Scalemates history, but you know, it definitely shows its age. You know, the moldings are, you know, slightly misaligned. This one tried my patience quite a bit. Raised panel lines as well. You know, that's a sign of certainly of an aging kit. It's certainly not in the fashion of newer kits. Plus side, looks like a Phantom. Cockpit wasn't too bad. Yeah, not many plus sides on this kit. But, you know, at least I played on through, got it finished. So, you know, you've seen the finished article. That, you know, could have spent a lot more time on that kit to try and bring it up to, you know, a more modern kind of kit standard. But I didn't feel like it was worth it. It was probably a £15 kit when I bought it. But it goes together okay-ish. You know, there is quite a bit of work, bit of filler. yeah, a bit of a patience trier for me at the moment. But you know, that's the way kits go. So you know, certainly for me anyway, when I 72nd scale, I do build some older kits from time to time. So you're going to find those ones that are going to not be to the standard you'd expect if you build some of the newer kits that are out there. But you kind of take the rough with the smooth with this this hobby. So there we go. So I'm not going to hang around too much longer. I'm not going to dissect it in any great detail. You know, I've built it. I've put it in the video. You've kind of heard most of the issues as I've gone through. You know, it's got its plus points, very few and far between. It's got a lot of its kind of negative points, but you know, the main one for me is it's another kit finished. It actually looks reasonably okay on the shelf. You know, all kind of moaning and complaints aside, but it's there and it's done and dusted. So I'm happy enough with that, and I can kick on to the next kit. So so thank you all for watching. If you've not done so already, please give us a subscribe. Please pop a like as well, and please feel free to leave a comment. And I will be back with further content in hopefully the not too distant future. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye.